Okay, well, Rosanne Haggerty, I'm so happy to be talking with you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, David. What a treat to reconnect like this.
We've just been chatting before this, and you reminded me that we first met around 2011 and were introduced by the Nobel laureate economist Paul Romer. I didn't actually remember that, and this was shortly after my book, The Neighborhood Project, was published. And so that's when we began. We go back a long way. And homelessness is your life work. I think that's safe to say. Is it safe to say that?
Oh, that's safe to say.
And so I'm eager to know how this became your life work, and then we can go on from there all the way up to the present with what you're doing with community solutions and with the help of a MacArthur Foundation 100 and change grant, one of the most competitive grants in the world, I'm sure. And also what you're doing in the city of Seattle, something that is interesting me much because of my daughter, Katie, who is the new mayor of Seattle. But let's begin with you and your story as to how you began to study homelessness, and then we'll go on from there.
Well, I think the immediate, cause, David, was I spent the year after I graduated from college as a full-time volunteer at Covenant House, which is a shelter for runaway and homeless youth, and their original site was in the Times Square area of New York. And so the deal was you live and work in this it's kind of this funky like former Baptist mission center on the corner of 44th and 8th, and then you work full time as a counselor or in some kind of support capacity at was I don't know 300 young person shelter. I might be exaggerating the size, but not by much. And I that year was so crazy making. I certainly intended it to be a year before I got on to kind of the rest of my life, which I imagine, you know, involved law school or journalism or something in that direction, either of those directions. But that year made such a profound impression on me, I think for surprising reasons, because it was the early 80s and homelessness was actually a new issue then. We hadn't seen people living on the street other than maybe like the Skid Row areas of some cities, but these were, you know, young people and women and people with mental health
I
issues.
guess if we go back a little ways, we had hobo camps and things like
Yeah,
that. But in
yeah.
terms of then, yeah, keep
Yeah, but
going.
in terms of like in the post-war years, yeah, this was not something that one saw. I certainly, I grew up in the Hartford, Connecticut area. I never heard of anyone being homeless, much less saw anyone who was without a home, living on the street. And that year, um, in some ways, because the issue is relatively newly named and this shelter had existed and expanded, but what was confounding about the experience was there was you know, a very robust uh, organization from a funding standpoint, all privately funded at that point. Like just an avalanche of volunteers, not just full-time folks like me. There were about 60 of us in this volunteer cohort who lived and worked there, and then you know, hundreds literally of people who would come in for different activities in support of the work. But the way that the
Roseanne,
organization,
I can't help but stop
Mhm.
you here and just ask the question: how is there such a vibrant volunteer community? What was fueling their interest? That interests me.
I think it's a really good question, David. This was, and boy, we could go down a rabbit hole here, but this was an institution established by a Roman Catholic priest who later was accused and found to have been involved in sexual abuse of young people at this program. But I was there at this period of time when I think the organization had the mailing addresses of every Catholic in the country, and donations were pouring in. But one of the things that I would repeatedly hear, and like even when I would, go home to Connecticut for a weekend, like my mother's friends were like, "Oh, yeah, that's fantastic work, and it's just what the church should be doing." I think in a
So
way,
you were
it
Catholic
was,
yourself.
I'm Catholic,
Yeah.
and I think that for um, for many people who supported either financially or with their volunteer service, uh, there was a sense of, something really good and important was happening. And if the motivation was in some way connected to their faith, that it was this kind of faith in action dimension that attracted a,
Yeah.
a, a lot of the folks who were there. In fact, just an aside, I think I was the only person in this 60 person or so volunteer community who had found my way there because I was interested in doing something that was like kind of more applied learning, and as opposed to someone who had heard Father Bruce Ritter give a talk at their church or their Catholic university and felt the similar kind of call to like, I should be like putting my faith to work, and but the, the fascinating thing about that period of time was uh, almost what I came to see fairly early on was almost a misidentification of the problem, because the young people that I was assigned to as a counselor, um, what they were saying they needed to get on their feet was housing. And now they needed everything. And many of these young people had, they'd run away, from home, but they'd really, kind of essentially been displaced by poverty. The majority of young people were from the five boroughs of New York, and uh, if there was an adult in their lives, it was, it coincided with the crack epidemic, the emergence of AIDS, a period of time in New York that, was characterized by many abandoned buildings and neighborhoods that had been destroyed. And so in my day-to-day interactions, these young people, as I like trying to find some kind of adult in their lives to kind of reconnect them with, or, kind of help them with a plan to move on. The concern was, like finding a stable relationship and a stable place to live. But the organization, and it's not
Again,
a
again,
right.
Rosanna, my role in this conversation is to drop in at periodic intervals and just bookmark some things. And so I think, there's a kind of a built environment component to this, housing,
Mhm, mhm,
and then there's a social relationship component to it
mhm,
that, and then both were equally needed is what I just heard. And so I think I
mhm,
just wanted to
mhm.
bookmark that.
Very important, and thank you. And then but the organization uh, had sort of defined the problem as young people vulnerable on the streets of Times Square, vulnerable to predators, and it's very sexualized as well. Just like get these kids off the street, and it's a crisis, and give them a place to stay for 30 days. And so the whole design of the program was respond to a crisis, not necessarily ask questions about why the crisis was happening, and without a kind of, investment in an off ramp. It was just like seeing young people through a crisis. Well, the reality was, and it was set up to be like a 30-day crisis shelter. The reality was none of the young people I interacted with that year had 30-day problems. They were much more complex. And so I, would, be walking back to our kind of funky community building after my shifts thinking, uh, I'm really glad that we can offer something to these young people today. Like, but this is like
This
no
is
kind of
way more
answer.
systemic. This is
Yeah, this is no
way
kind
more
of
systemic.
answer. Yeah. And it was just a very early experience of how really well-intentioned people with the ability to command resources and mobilize volunteers and skills, like, could be asking the wrong question, and so anyway, it was a very confounding year, David, and I think just another uh, element to it was I volunteered on an overnight shift once a week rather, at the Holy Cross Church on 42nd Street and between 8th and Ninth, which was around the corner from our community building. And that had opened up that winter as just an overnight shelter for homeless women. Because again, New York was just in this throes of this issue is kind of metastasizing. Yeah, where did it come from? It went from like a problem no one noticed. All of a sudden, there are all these people on the street, and the city had been sued and had entered into a legal arrangement where they would provide shelter on demand. And so we would be there, the other volunteer and I, and a busload of women would arrive, usually about 20 to 30, exhausted, usually about 9 o'clock, just eager to just fall into a cot. And those who would stay awake and chat with me and the other volunteer, they were desperate for information on where to find housing. And as a volunteer, like the instructions I had were like how to turn on the coffee and where to put the cots away in the morning, and yeah, I would spend, those hours thinking, who's in charge here? Like, is there some plan? And imagine that there was some, Oz behind the curtain coordinating how the city was going to respond to homelessness. But my daytime experience and my very profound overnight experience with these women, throughout that winter was like lots of important, in the moment, helpful, if not life-saving activity, but like without any kind of frame around what's going on and how do we get ahead of it. And I think those experiences as a young person just out of college made me so it was really haunting. Like, who is in charge? How do you do something that matters here as opposed to something that is, just a response in a day? And here I
Well,
am all
when
these years later.
when I first learned about you, you had become known for, as I recall, having procured an old New York City hotel as a place to house or these people,
Mhm.
and in the lobby providing the social services right there in the lobby, so the social services came to them as opposed to them going to the social services. And so, what was striking about that was, in the first place, dignified surroundings.
Mhm.
These were
Mhm.
nice places, not just a cot in a
Mhm.
warehouse or
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And this kind of wraparound social services
Mhm.
that had were easily located. And so that was how I first learned about you. And maybe you could fast forward to that part. How did you actually go from being a volunteer to having commandeered a hotel like that? That's pretty incredible all by itself. And then we're going to move on to your what seemed like an insanely ambitious goal, I believe, of housing 100,000 people, and then going beyond that to what you now are working with, what you call Built for Zero. So that's just a preview of what's coming next. But how did you hop from being a volunteer to having commandeered an old New York City hotel?
Well, as my volunteer year was, the end of it was in sight, I was sort of like possessed, frankly. Like, I guess one characteristic is of mine is I don't think you get to complain about a problem if you're not willing to entertain other ideas or do something. And so this reverberation of like the women, the young people telling me that the issue was housing had really started to uh, drive me, I guess. And I had never thought about like, where does housing come from? Who builds it? Who allocates it? Who pays for it? And so I decided I would try to learn. So I got a job as sort of an assistant to an assistant at Brooklyn Catholic Charities, which had started a housing office. And back in the day, we're talking like 1983 now,
How old were you then?
22.
Okay.
And but in neighborhoods that you just kind of gasp at the prices of any housing now. They were filled with vacant buildings, and many of them church-owned buildings. And there were two just visionary bishops leading the diocese, both trained as social workers, who are like, "We've got rising homelessness, shocking in New York. Like now, something that's normalized. It was shocking still, in the early '80s." And they're like, "Can't we put some of these convents and orphanages and schools to work as housing?" And so it was an amazing moment and experience. So I just learned on the job with a wonderful mentor and colleagues there. Worked on projects in about 20 different neighborhoods, all types of housing for seniors, housing for young people, housing for first-time homeowners, housing, recreating housing that had been known as single room occupancy housing by turning an former orphanage in Williamsburg and some Catholic schools into single room occupancy buildings. And it was out of that just immersion and learning. I mean, I'm kind of quite the apologist for housing is the key to everything, David. Just like it's design, it's history, it's community context, it's organizing, it's finance, and so I learned a lot, and that's what led me to the Times Square Hotel. And I didn't have a plan to start my own not-for-profit, but I had a real attachment to that very large single occupancy building on the corner of 43rd and 8th Avenue, next to the place, the kooky building that I'd lived in when I was a Covenant House volunteer. And I
Wow.
actually knew some of those people. I'd pass them on the sidewalk and wave, like the man with the flag in his hat, and the woman would always smile at me. And I was like, that building it had been trashed. It was in bankruptcy and was going to be auctioned. And I was like, someone should do something here. And it was kind of like one of these, in retrospect, it was sort of extraordinary, but yeah, I just kind of jammed my foot in the door and developed a plan that I thought actually, based on all the work I'd done, was viable. But I had no organization. I was looking around for like, oh, here's the plan that I think would work and is financeable, given the city's resources. And I couldn't find an established organization to implement it, but was and I'd say, probably quite significant as a theme in the conversation here, David, just having an idea about what a solution to a problem that lots of people were seeing there, because there were about 200 elderly and mentally ill uh, tenants remaining at the Times Square Hotel amidst just it had like floors had been burned out. It was like a 1700
So they
building.
were just squatting there?
No, they were the original tenants, but these were the poor souls who had nowhere to go. So all of this, chaos had kind of evolved around them. But the just putting a plan out there that would be around preserving the housing of these individuals, saving that building and turning it into a decent living environment, and bringing in the support services that individuals needed to live in kind of a frankly a healthy and supported way. Uh, some very surprising champions just sought me out and asked how to help, and so it wasn't so
I have
much
to insert my favorite Zen koan,
okay.
and which is leap and a net will appear.
Yeah.
Leap and a net will appear. So you leapt and a net appeared.
Yeah, it certainly, yeah, that sums it up, and it's funny, like the net showed up in the form of very surprising folks who, another lesson learned, people can have very different motivations for wanting the same thing and be open to that. And business leaders are like, just we want a well-managed building. Housing advocates are like, you know, you lose the city's largest SRO, like where do we take a last stand about the importance of preserving housing for for the very poor? And so anyway, it was quite an education.
Yeah, if I could just illustrate another important point there, that to evaluate people on the basis of what they want to do, not
Hmm.
necessarily how they're thinking about it, I think is
Hmm.
what you just said.
Yep.
And there's a very important lesson there too. But continue, so keep going.
So that was the surprising beginning of that chapter of uh, uh, leading an organization that called Common Ground. It still exists, and it's renamed itself Breaking Ground. But I led that for 20 years and built a lot of housing in and around New York City, about 3,000 units of housing, um, and very, very successful buildings. But I say, David, it's probably only 7 years in where um, I was realizing that there was something going on that I didn't I didn't understand and didn't have an answer to, which is, I think, this kind of imagined that, gee, we'd finish off the renovations at the Times Square, and all of a sudden, street homelessness and in the neighborhood would disappear. Like it would just magically kind of like align. And yet, we the building was completed, fully tenanted, and we were on to another building or two in Midtown Manhattan, former hotels, former YMCA's, and turning them into mixed income housing with low wage workers as well as people coming from homelessness, plus the services on site. That was the formula. But it was like, wasn't this problem just supposed to sort itself out magically with the buildings being open? But I was like, I am still walking past some of the individuals who, lived on the streets that I, would wave to before. And it is, and this probably is just a softball pitch into your life's work, David, which is, hmm, why am I, being very committed to finding solutions to homelessness, just thinking about housing, like the buildings and it was sobering because it was like, it reminded me of like my critique of Covenant House back in the day. Like, why are you just thinking about shelter? I was like, okay, now I'm the person who has to, like, why am I just thinking about housing? What's the rest of this ecosystem? Like, and at that time, and it's sadly, true in New York to this day, certain organizations ran shelters, other organizations ran outreach teams, other organizations had support services and mental health counseling services. Other organizations ran medical services. Other organizations provided food services. And we're talking about all the same people who needed that help, but none of us were talking to each other.
So
And
not sufficiently systemic, not nearly
no,
sufficiently systemic. All these agencies not
hmm,
coordinated with each other.
exactly. And the idea that if we were going to really get to something transformational and see those numbers of people experiencing homelessness come down across, at that point, I was just focused on New York, like it was this awakening that like the whole experience of like why people are losing their homes, how to prevent that from happening, how to connect people to a home, how to make sure the right kinds of homes are available, how to help people pay for those homes, how to see that the services people needed to manage on their own. All of this had to be brought together in a new way. And the most acute representation of the failure were the people who persistently remained on the street. And so it took a few years once I had this, kind of realization. And there were a couple of moments that just, were um, a sort of made it sort of inescapable to me that like the honest thing to do was to acknowledge the limits of our view of the issue and to figure out how to think about the whole system. And so it took a couple of years of just trying to get organizations to kind of voluntarily create a more coherent system. And I, you know, came face to face with some of the structural problems. I mean, every organization had government contracts of one sort or another that were paying them to provide units of service, not to solve the problem. And there was a culture of suspicion and competition generally, like, like we can't talk about the same client because she's my client. And the whole language of clients just seemed like wrong. And why are we talking about clients, not, you know, neighbors, people who, we should be working together to help move off the street. And so that's what gave rise to what ultimately became Community Solutions. But we started a project after realizing while the desire might have been there on the part of many organizations who worked in and around Times Square to collaborate for outcomes, uh, the the reinforcing structures of contracts that were paying for certain activities rather than a community-wide outcome was just the persistent barrier. So I was able to raise money, not a lot, from a couple of different foundations and hired someone to, with the specific charge of, in the middle of Times Square, reduce homelessness by 2/3 in 3 years. And I realized that even within the network of people I knew who worked on homelessness, I think that the possibility of dramatically changing things and working toward an end state of we just don't have homelessness anymore, people could not even get to that level imaginatively because, we're in this culture of compliance and, a problem that had been defined as, kind of an endless stream of need as opposed to something's really wrong with the system. And so I ended up hiring someone who had recently left the military as a special operations
Oh, wow, that's
leader
cool. Okay.
because I was like
Those guys know how
if
to
like who
coordinate
can build a
action.
team, travel without a map, like dauntlessness was and so that's how it happened that we were like we actually, and we put the word out like who wants to be in on this, and only three other organizations put their hands up: the Business Improvement District, a church, and the Midtown Community Court that was, problem solving court and like, around misdemeanors.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, let's solve this. And so we were able to reduce homelessness, 80 street homelessness by 87% in the middle of Times Square, that 20 block area. And we were tracking to make sure, the issue wasn't being displaced. At the same time, reduced street homelessness in the surrounding 230 blocks of Midtown by 43%. And so, and the formula is like to this day what we help communities adopt, which is you need that kind of command center team, like a collaborative structure that is really aimed at a system-wide goal that's measured in a way that kind of everyone is sharing that process, and the kind of an honest path to understanding what is happening. But also, you need to know people experiencing homelessness by name in real time. You've got to take the anonymity out of these problems. And so it's back to the social relationship. And then you need to create as immediate a path to uh, some kind of stable living situation as possible. We raise a little bit more money, and with the help of the YMCA up on Central Park West, I think we rented like 12 rooms. And then one of the things that was an important learning for us is even at Common Ground, we came to see through this process that some of our intake processes, like our applications, and kind of some of this was required by funding sources, but it was far too onerous. And so we had to lighten up on like the way we operated our buildings and our intake processes. And so, it was actually, yeah, like the shared aim, a nimble, all-in team, knowing people by name, making housing and a real a kind of the promise of stability real for people, and then the flexible resources, frankly, because unlike all of these organizations that were bound by very restrictive contracts, having the flexibility to say, well, we need to spend some money here in order to get that outcome was incredibly important. And I think just wrapping it all together, David, just establishing a culture of learning and iteration, that just kind of invited um, innovation. And that's
Yeah,
what we do to this day. So,
yeah. Well, let me, that's just so great and so convergent. So let me just kind of play some of that back through my own language. And then those of you that are, those of our listeners who are familiar with my work, hopefully Eleanor Ostrom is lighting up like a light bulb.
mhm,
Um, and so in the first place, this is a very systemic problem. You have to tackle it at the systemic level. So
mhm,
the whole system is, you might say, is your unit of selection.
mhm,
And so all of the stakeholders that are in a position to do something have to get together and be a part of that and to be coordinated with each other. I think that's one of the things that you
mhm,
said. And then this is the part that I love because it's very general for any problem. Uh, you deal with the problem of homelessness, but there's any problem is a manifestation of a complex system. And so this general algorithm is
mhm,
needed for the solution of any systemic
mhm,
problem. First of all, the system is the unit of selection. And then that gets brought to bear upon each and every individual in a contextual fashion. You need to name the individual, you need to, know anonymity. And then you don't know and you'll never know how that individual needs to draw upon the whole system because
mhm,
that's how contextual everything is. And so the whole system approach has to be combined with a very local approach
mhm,
in
mhm,
order to address the problem for that person. And it must be iterative. It must be, you must be flexible is the word that you use, or adaptable would be the use.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
this is basically what it means to evolve a cooperative
mhm,
system. It's a general algorithm. And part of that is monitoring. Unless we can quantify what's happening and have
mhm,
a way of track what's happening, then forget about it.
mhm,
And one of Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles is monitoring agreed upon behavior. In a
mhm,
small group, you don't need technology for that,
mhm,
but in a large system, you do.
mhm,
And so on your website, for example, it's really admirable how much you feature the need to monitor what what goes on. So there's a whole assessment and a scientific
mhm,
infrastructure um, for this. And so much of this is structural, not just the buildings, which of course are structural, but the entire procedure and processes and
mhm,
so on and so forth. And a general lesson is that if if inner compassion, if inner intentions are going to translate into outer action,
mhm,
then you cannot do that without structure.
mhm,
And the more large and systemic it becomes, the more structure is is needed.
mhm,
And so this is reflected in on your website, by the way, because I think that anyone can visit the Community Solutions website and you describe it in those terms, in terms of five key uh, changes. But so let's go now to how you succeeded to the point of getting awarded the most competitive grant in the world, the MacArthur Foundation's 100 million and change grant. So, and then I want to, for just to map out the rest of our conversation, your experience, because you're probably 3 years into that grant, maybe. Is that about right?
uh, yeah, we're into the fourth year, so completed 3 years. Mhm,
Fourth year. So you got
mhm,
a track record here. And I
mhm,
think, first of all, I know there's going to be achievements, which
mhm,
are some of them are listed on your website, and I know there's going to be challenges. And so I think that despite the fact of having all of this wonderful support, then you've got your own learning curve
mhm,
and need for flexibility. I'm really eager to hear about that. Then what's going on in Seattle, and then we wrap it up uh,
mhm,
as to what can take place anywhere. But tell us the story of the MacArthur grant.
Well, we applied for the 100 and change grant, which is a 5-year uh, grant, total of $100 million that the MacArthur Foundation has now awarded 3 times every, I don't know, 3 years or every 3 years or so, I guess, since they initiated this, uh, to a single idea with promise of uh, changing a major issue, the trajectory of a major issue. I'm not doing it justice. It's more poetically stated on the MacArthur website. But why we were, and it was kind of amazing that we received this to expand, scale up our work, and uh, our aim is actually by the end of this year to be at a tipping point on this issue of homelessness, where it is understood as a systems problem with a credible, easily adaptable roadmap for any community to follow, where there is evidence of the effectiveness of this roadmap manifest in meaningful reductions across diverse communities in terms of type and size, where the public conversation on homelessness is notably shifting, and where policy adoption supporting solutions-based policy, where there's evidence of greater adoption. So that's how we have kind of framed what a tipping point looks like in this space. And the the opportunity, I think that uh, might have been significant for you know, MacArthur selecting us amidst many worthy proposals was in the midst of COVID. This was awarded. We received the grant in 2021, and then kind of after a gear up period, launched the implementation. But when you think of uh, homelessness being an issue that crosses many of the systemic issues that were brought to light during COVID, from uh, the state of our public health systems, racial equity, when you look at the disproportionate percentage of Black and Native American individuals who experience homelessness relative to their percentages in the wider population, the importance of a stable and safe home. I mean, how did any of us, kind of manage our lives during COVID? The importance of shelter, the I think the fact that this was also a moment in our work where we had established a whole array of meaningful proof points. We had at the time
You were
we
so you were working in several already working in multiple
in
communities by then.
70 communities at the time we applied, and we had this whole framework that I've just described to you that we learned, back in the day in Times Square. We actually kind of brought it forward, refined it. We had this phase of our at the launch of our national work, and the moving from common ground to create a new organization, Community Solutions, that had been accompanied by an invitation to communities throughout the country to learn as a group how to work in this way. We called that project 100,000 Homes, and it was 4 years. Can we come together nationally to find housing for 100,000 of our most long-term chronically homeless individuals? And 186 communities, I should say, signed up, participated, contributed to that, and more than 105,000 people were housed during that period of time with the resources largely that the communities already had, but put kind of put their foot on the gas. Like, what do we have to do differently? How do we work together? How do we
So
actually
there's
align?
a point to be made there. You don't need a big dump of money necessarily, but basically every community has
Mhm.
capacity,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like stone soup here. I mean, everyone's chipping in
Exactly.
and so on and so
Mhm.
forth. So that which is very optimistic.
Very
So
optimistic.
you
And
don't need a
Mhm.
MacArthur grant to do this, friends. So
Precisely. But we had provided, as you pointed out, David, the structure. So anyway, we had moved from 100,000 homes after that like, but certainly the country hadn't ended homelessness. So that was the launch of Built for Zero, how to work even more deeply on, understanding the inflow and outflow dynamics and bring other parts of the community into that work. And so when we applied for the MacArthur grant, we had a very robust network of more than the 70 communities who are actively involved with this very rigorous Built for Zero effort, which was around getting a much bigger handle on the overall picture from a person and a data standpoint, and beginning to look at system dynamics and where to influence the, inflow and outflow patterns. And so I think MacArthur looked at, everything that was kind of brought to light during COVID, around, disparities and the role of safe shelter and, the robust public health systems. And I think that, contributed, along with our very extensive network, the evidence already at hand
Well, you
that
had an evidence base basically. So, I mean,
we
you
had an
really
evidence
could,
base.
if you
Yeah.
said you did something, you could show that you did. And so that
Yeah.
must have been a huge factor.
Yeah, and a framework and a data platform and a kind of an approach to, improvement coaching, that, was essentially oriented to how to help groups of organizations in these communities, within the not-for-profit sector, between not-for-profit and government
Sure.
staff, to collaborate effectively and to adopt the use of data as a learning tool as opposed to, an instrument of judgment. And so I think we have made data cool in the homelessness sector as a result of
I
our
want to
work.
I want to dwell on this a little bit because I have other colleagues, including a colleague named Bill Barberg, who does this kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm,
And at some point, in order to do it well, there has to be some technology tools that come in,
mhm,
which are often called strategic mapping and
mhm,
multi-stakeholder strategic mapping. But and first of all, I'm sure you'll agree with this, it must be participatory. So all sorts of people must participate, including those who are not at all
mhm,
technically oriented. But at
mhm,
the end of the day, it has to
mhm,
translate into some box and arrow diagram
mhm,
in
mhm,
which you actually can go and find the push points and
mhm.
and
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so, did you employ this
Mhm.
layer of technology in order to do this? Is this something an important part of what you do?
Yes, I think at the outset, one of the things that we help communities who join our network to actually construct is kind of a system map. I mean, yeah, as far as what is the experience of one person moving from, the streets to a home? Like, what are the steps they have to go through? Like, what are the pain points? And that, I think across our network, it's almost become like a shared language. It's been a while before I've been at an exercise, a whiteboard exercise, but it does start there with, like, how do we actually get alignment around, um, what is the nature of the challenge? What are the barriers? What does the alternative system that operates to achieve the results we want potentially look like? And so that is kind of foundational to teach kind of a systems approach. But one of the things that needed to be constructed, and it's continually being refined, David, is what is the information a community needs? What is mandated by historically the federal government is essentially almost an accounting of how you spent your money and how many people, received services that were federally funded. No insight through that kind of data collection, about who are these individuals, you know, uh, how are they moving through the experience of homelessness? Where did they come from? How do we accelerate housing placements? How do we, see that the right organizations in our community are around the table to see that the interventions that would prevent or accelerate an exit from homelessness are happening? And so a lot of our work in the Built for Zero phase of our existence has been around building those kind of data tools, data collection, data analytic tools, making them easy, training communities to use them. It really
How contextual are they? Is it something you can build that all communities can use, or is there a lot of tweaking
totally.
that's needed?
Oh
This,
yeah, no, and one of the big projects this year, David, is we have already available like a data starter kit, like anyone can download it and use it, but we are a big priority this year is just putting more and more of our work, the tools that we and communities in our network have developed, kind of in support of this idea that you need to have accurate, person-specific, real-time information at the center of an effective collaborative. And then you need to have the human capacity to interpret and act on that information. The So that's been a kind of a major thrust of our work, but all available open source. The the training in quality improvement and the kind of coaching that we've provided has been an important contribution, I'd say, because historically, not too many of us have been trained in kind of the practices of collaboration, of ideation, of learning rather than, just kind of asserting a point of view. I think one of the things that's trapped us in, and trapped progress on homelessness has been the almost, you know, presumption of government funders that the answer is this or the answer is that, as opposed to what do we have to do to make and how do we make sure all of our intentions and resources add up to what we want, which is fewer people experiencing homelessness. You have, gosh, at this point in New York City, for example, more than $300 million spent on outreach that there is no expectation that it's actually going to lead to housing. It's about offers of rides to shelter and health checks, but the just the way to reinforce with the right structure, in each community, that the goal is an outcome, not the activity, and you can't get to an outcome without the right information to really enable the shared accountability that actually leads to the kinds of communities we want.
Yeah. So, I mean, in my language, this is selecting at the level of the whole system. If you're
Mhm.
selecting for components, subcomponents,
Yeah.
and this again is very general. So in other applications, you just almost any application that, I mean, every large complex system does consist of subsystems. But if you
Mhm.
try to optimize the subsystems, then that does not add up to the whole system functioning well. You have to do better than that.
Mhm.
And so that goes. I make a distinction between
Mhm.
two meanings of the phrase complex adaptive systems.
Mhm.
A complex system that is adaptive as a system,
Mhm.
or a complex system of agents following their respective adaptive strategies. And
Mhm.
the second kind, it does not just self-organize into the
Mhm.
first kind. You've got to select the whole system. As hard as that might be, it's actually manageable. And so I think that it's hard, but not
Mhm.
impossible. And so,
Yeah.
and I think that you're proof of that. I wonder if you could give an example of, I mean, on your website, you have 170 communities, 15 communities have achieved functional zero,
Mhm.
um, 94 have achieved quality real-time data, which is one of the way stations.
Mhm.
Um, 45 have achieved measurable reductions. Could you just describe like one of the star examples of one of these 15 communities that have achieved functional zero, just to see a success story?
Yeah. Um, Maybe I'll offer two, just because it's important to know that communities of every size and political leaning,
Yes.
can and are making progress. Um, so, for example, uh, the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, it's a six-county area, uh, quite poor, very limited public dollars in terms of state investment and housing or community the kind of community response activities to homelessness. But they have they that it's about a 600,000 population across this area. Now this whole network of communities, they ended veteran homelessness in 2015. So they have sustained like no veteran homeless for like more than as soon as you're identified as a homeless veteran, you're rehoused within a month. So that's been over 10 years of kind of sustained, solutions. They have ended chronic homelessness. They've ended youth homelessness. They've ended family homelessness. They are still working on um, uh, the remaining single individuals who are homeless, but they know everyone by name. The last I checked, it was just, I think, about 120 people across these 6 counties actively working on them. They have employed the coordinating body, what's called the continuum of care for this region, has engaged like every veterans organization, the chambers of commerce, and each of the small cities there, the faith communities. They didn't have the money for outreach. While New York City is spending $300 million a year, getting almost no results, these counties have basically found every church group with a van and trained them up along with the sheriff's office. If you see anyone who's experiencing homelessness, here's, and just so that
Sweep
kind
them
of
up right away.
resourcefulness and
That's amazing.
using their assets. So they're like, they're an extraordinary story. But
Wow.
meanwhile, in Denver, they've seen a 45% reduction in unsheltered homelessness in the last 2 years. It has been a priority of Mayor Johnston's an all hands on deck approach with the key organizations and city agencies. They focused on initially on a part of the city that had, I mean, it seemed like hundreds of tents. Their downtown mall area. The business community has been an active part of it. The philanthropic community as well as the not-for-profits. And success begets success. It builds confidence that it can keep going. And um, I think every like cluster encampment has now been resolved. There's still several hundred people who are living outside, but every single one of them is known by name, and they are just opening more housing, smoothing the path to move people out of the temporary housing and temporary shelter accommodations they've stood up to help enable this massive commitment to bringing down the levels of unsheltered homelessness. And you can see different cities, as you say, like the structure looks the same. It's just very expanded in a city the size of Denver, but in some ways it's complex in a place like these counties in Mississippi. Everyone knows each other. It's easier to get on the same page, but you're also having to contend with significant distances and transportation challenges. But
Yeah.
the reason to just look at the fact that there is like an approach that can scale in its context that is getting results should make us all very um, proud and hopeful that we have communities that are putting in the work and showing that there's a path.
Well, those are two great examples. And so
Mhm,
one of those was so heartening. This is not red or blue. I mean, this is basically
mhm,
can and has taken place anywhere. That's what's great.
mhm,
And then the fact that you mentioned veterans, I'm also going to be doing a podcast with Greg Colburn and his book,
mhm,
Homelessness as a Housing Problem. That's going to be a wonderful bookend, I think, to our podcast here. But one of the things I learned from his book, which I thought was both amazing
mhm,
and sad, is that actually there is a homelessness problem that's been solved to a large extent, and that's veteran homelessness.
mhm,
And now
mhm,
you might ask, why would that be? It's because you honor the humanity of the veteran.
mhm. Yep.
If it's a homeless veteran, then you feel that you owe something to that person. You don't blame that person for their
Mhm.
predicament. And
Yep.
therefore, as a human being in need,
Mhm,
you're committed to helping them. That's
mhm,
not something which is often not extended to other homeless
mhm.
people, although it should. And
Yep.
so it just amazed me that that
Mhm.
I mean, the homelessness problem for veterans is just as complex as any homelessness.
Mhm.
It's the same problem.
Mhm.
And the big difference is your attitude towards the homeless
Mhm.
person. I found that amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just skip that whole debate about worthy and unworthy poor. It's just like get to work on getting folks connected to the help they need to get out of homelessness for good. And I think it's also because of that commitment to the person as opposed to what gets in the way of that. Um, Congress has consistently appropriated rental subsidy dollars and uh, case management dollars to assist veterans in escaping homelessness. And so it is a story, as you'll be able to explore even more deeply with Greg, of we know what to do. It's around the commitment, first of all, the will, the focus, and also veterans are an easily identified subpopulation. They have their discharge papers and matched to the basic resources, housing and support, the problem actually shrinks. The country's reduced veteran homelessness more than 50% in the last 9 or 10 years, and even with new experiences of homelessness, I think the VA assisted, along with its community partners, something like 38,000 veterans in being reconnected with a home last year. And so it also illustrates that disruptions to housing are common. They should not become long-term crises of homelessness and all of the misery and uh, health challenges and everything that goes along with it. We can have a dynamic housing system the way we have emergency rooms at the front end of our healthcare system. Like there will be problems people will encounter, transition moments in their lives, disruptions that should not turn into homelessness. We can
That's a good
have
point.
a dynamic
The comparison with
system.
the emergency
Yeah.
centers is a really good one. Well, I want to focus more on the challenges that you've encountered,
Mhm.
and I want to make a guess as to what those challenges might be. Um, because based on my own experience uh, and I think it also makes sense that when you're trying to work at the level of a very complex system with multiple agents, multiple organizations, some of them are not going to be going along. Some of them are not going to be very
Mhm.
adaptable. There will be obstacles, not not partners, basically.
Mhm.
And that it has, that might have to do with intention, but even well-intentioned organizations often are frozen and they don't have the
Mhm.
adaptability that's needed in
Mhm.
order for them to change like that. And so it's really hard to rely upon, or actually, it means that you should not rely upon any particular agent. And I just wanted you to say a little bit about the communities
Mhm.
of care, which I think is like the whole nation has been divided, as I understand it,
Mhm.
into communities of care.
Mhm.
Is it required that you work with a community of care in your region? And I'm guessing that probably um, that would be bad because not all communities of care are going to be oriented towards what needs to be
Mhm.
done, and so also for any other particular
Mhm.
stakeholders. And so that means that you must find the
Mhm.
flexibility in the system, basically, and then that's your current starting point.
Mhm.
It's probably highly contextual. That's something probably which you can't second
Mhm.
guess what's going to, you know, how it's going
Mhm.
to play out in any particular community. So am I in the ballpark as opposed to
You, you,
the complexities and the challenges?
you are very much so, David. It's actually continuum of care, COCs.
Okay, sorry.
And yes, the country has been divided up into these like HUD recognized funding distribution zones, and you might call them about 400 of them. And we have in our work always, engaged with the continuum of care, the COC, because by design, that's where the federal government dollars flow into communities through these COCs, and also the COCs are the responsible party with respect to maintaining whatever data does exist on homelessness,
Right.
even
So I
though
mean,
it's
they're definitely a
inadequate.
keystone
They're a
organization.
keystone, but they were really never set up to have the breadth of powers or authority to uh, actually drive reductions in homelessness. And so part of what we have been working on with this network of communities is how do we get the right group of people around the table? And increasingly, it's been clear that that has to involve the mayors of those communities, and it needs to involve like the business improvement district, the healthcare system. There are a couple of key actors in every community who are interacting with people experiencing homelessness or who control important resources, whether like the police or policies around housing codes. So I'll say there are two big, I'll actually call out a third as just a kind of a unique boulder that needs to be kind of moved in every community. Um, Starting from maybe an obvious one, I think the whole country now has the memo that we have a very critical housing shortage of, like, almost in every community. The estimates range from 4 to 7 million units, but there's almost nowhere you can go where certainly someone on a fixed income from SSI or a VA benefit or Social Security, or who's working full time, even in a minimum wage job, can afford to pay for housing and spend the what's kind of historically recognized as an appropriate amount that you're not actually shortchanging your health and other
Yeah,
kind of
right.
needed expenses, so like 30% of income. So you can't find that housing anywhere. So that has and Greg Colburn will reinforce that with his terrific work. That just shortage of housing is a huge factor everywhere. So that is a barrier. That's something that we have increasingly, well, we've approached that in three ways, David. Focus increasingly on what are the land use and regulatory issues that get in the way of communities having the housing they need, and joining forces with housing advocates to help kind of move communities toward the freedom to build that will be essential to enabling space to.
So it's here where things like regulations and zoning laws and things like that get in the way and have to be overcome.
Exactly. I mean, and yeah, a lot of the critical things that will help everybody's housing concerns, whether it's, allow, the local hospital to hire nurses, or the local, yeah, big box store to hire staff. I mean, that's, kind of housing at a level that folks in essential services can
Yeah.
afford. Like that is enabled if you have, just as of right, multifamily housing construction in any commercial zone. If you allow smaller lot sizes, there's some very, proven, powerful ideas that groups across the political spectrum agree on. And so that is usually the focus. The focus is usually on a state level changes to the regulations that get in the way of the right range and quantity of housing being built. Also, municipal contexts are important. And so, in many of the places we work, we're helping to educate, like, here's what has to change to allow the greater flexibility in the use of housing. For example, many communities ban occupancy of a single home, say by more than three unrelated adults,
Yep.
or
Yep.
things like that that are like, yeah, maybe you don't want fraternities having keg parties, but like the
Yeah,
consequence of
there's
not
ways to
allowing
do
that
it.
is you get people living on the street. And, this is, and
Yeah.
so that's one part of how we're helping communities um, really take a systemic approach. How do you create an enabling environment for the right kind of housing to be built? The second is um, we have our own housing fund. This was also seeded by the MacArthur grant. So we've raised about well over $200 million now in social impact capital, and we've been out buying multifamily properties from private owners to actually pledge into local community efforts to move people quickly out of housing, and just kind of demonstrating how capital can be mobilized from unusual sources. not government, to help accelerate the preservation of affordable housing and access by people who've been experiencing homelessness. And the last thing we do is it is, a bit of a labyrinth in many places just to move someone who's experiencing homelessness into a government subsidized unit. There are so many eligibility requirements that it's, kind of mind-boggling. It's like, and so we're helping communities to smooth out that path and to better optimize the housing that they have. But the big question, like big obstacles, housing. And so those are the ways in which we're engaging the issue. The second big obstacle is the one that you pointed to, David, which is just in some places collaboration is still an unnatural act. People like are like, I've got to keep my own organization going. There's all this like the sky will fall if we enter into a completely appropriate HIPAA qualified data sharing agreement. Like this, like let's not collaborate. Breaking through that culture is one of the ongoing challenges. And with the communities in our Built for Zero network, they've put their hands up to say, like, we get it. The problem is us. How do we learn to work differently? But that's 170 communities. There are hundreds more who are still like not working in a way that is going to get them, on a path to solutions. But then I think overall, one of the things, and I'd love your take on this, there's probably a way of framing this that, you have thought about in your amazing work, but um, it's almost the sense of despair and learned helplessness. Like, communities just not feeling that there's a path forward, and that just so it's the lack of conviction and
And
political
hope.
will.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I think here's where the the most important ingredient is a strong sense of identity and purpose
mhm,
um, and a feeling that you can do these things, in which case that could just become this
mhm,
tremendous reservoir of energy.
mhm,
Um, um, and it's here, I think, that segues nicely into the next point, major point I want to make, which is that, and this is actually kind of a libertarian perspective on it, that as to who solves problems, on the one hand, the market is good at
mhm,
solving some problems,
mhm,
the government is good
mhm,
at solving some problems, but then there's so much more that's neither government nor markets.
mhm,
And this is sometimes called the third sector.
mhm,
And it's everything that's not markets or
mhm,
government. It's every kind of organization, churches,
mhm,
schools. I mean, just think of all the groups and
mhm,
processes
mhm,
which fall into this
mhm,
neither category of governance and markets. And the very important concept of polycentric governance, of
mhm,
part of the Ostromian um, paradigm, is that life consists of many spheres of activity. Every sphere has an optimal scale, and good governance requires finding the right scale for each sphere and appropriately coordinating among the spheres. And so, in the case of homelessness, yeah, you've already said it's just really important for government to be involved. If the mayor's not doing
mhm,
anything,
mhm,
that won't work.
mhm,
Markets, maybe, to a degree. It's not going to be entirely non-market, and
mhm,
so
mhm,
you can't, get away from
mhm,
markets. But then, of course, you've just got to have that third sector, and
mhm,
just to start out with the faith community for starters.
mhm,
And so, what's your own take on that kind of conceptualization of
mhm,
governments,
mhm,
markets, and this highly
mhm.
diverse third sector?
Yeah.
I'm guessing you'll say that the third sector is like essential, and that there's like so much that needs to be done by neither governments nor markets.
Mhm,
And so they're absolutely critical. Often what's
mhm,
needed is going to take place at a small scale. Small is
mhm,
beautiful
mhm,
much of the time.
mhm,
So just if you could just comment on what I just laid out,
mhm.
and I'd very much appreciate that. And then we'll move to Seattle.
Yeah. Well, just to completely plus one that, yeah, you need to have the three sectors and the third sector encompassing the not-for-profits and the faith community and uh, those the philanthropy, those institutions that are.
The business community, not in a way that's just laissez-faire. I
Mm-mm.
mean, so the business community being involved, but not necessarily just totally free market business
Right.
community. So I think this provides a model for
Mhm. Yeah.
pro-social businesses that's
Mhm.
so continue.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think just to, kind of underscore the, the range of, community, actors, getting them all rowing in the same direction is the key here. And what is needed, and I think what your work has pointed to for such a in such important, ways, and I hope more and more people are grasping it, is what are the governance structures that we need that can harness all of that toward common aims, and the feedback loops that kind of signal, like, are we making progress, and that kind of take the tools from each sector and put them in service of a shared community-wide goal. I mean, one of the things, and it can move to Seattle, that I think is a very helpful image is, how do communities operate and how do they show up in the case of an event-based disaster? Like, you want to know how to end homelessness in your community? Go talk to whoever is in charge of your community's emergency
Disaster.
management system. Like, if a flood knocked out 300 homes and it's a declared emergency, like, everybody has already rehearsed this. And it's sort of like um, almost native to us. Like, how do we help? What role do we play? And there's a structure for that. And like, if we use the fact of knowing that, like, we need kind of a clear structure, yeah, some decision rights, a communication system, a way of procuring things on an emergency basis, a way of slotting in, the volunteers and the citizens and the
That's
law
perfect.
enforcement and the, like, we actually have
It
this.
goes along with what you said earlier, Roseanne,
Yeah,
about the emergency medical care. I mean, so
yeah,
there's so many
mhm,
analogs basically
mhm. Yeah,
that we can learn from. I'm so happy that you
mhm,
made those points.
yeah. But turning to Seattle, we have been thrilled to, just in the last, gosh, several months actually, be working, be invited to work with the city, the county, and not-for-profits, and interestingly, through the initial invitation and outreach by the Downtown Seattle Association, the Business Improvement District in downtown Seattle, and its bids are interesting because they are this kind of almost they're not for profits, and they represent this structure for bringing together, government, not for profits, and the business community.
What is this now? What is it doing
A
this?
business improvement district.
Oh, a
Uh,
business improvement district.
yeah,
Okay.
because even the the legal formula is you need to have representation by, some percentage of the businesses in your geography, but you also have to have ex officio participation by local government.
So this is an
And
official designation.
yeah, and I think you would find bids something that, well, you and Eleanor Ostrom would be excited about how they actually operate in this um, governance of the the three sectors that need to collaborate, and their remit is usually like keeping that downtown business district clean, safe, and healthy. But it is a just a consistent, kind of, it's a type of kind of activity, type of corporation that actually solves for these problems of the commons. And so increasingly, we find across, especially in large cities, it's business improvement districts who are like, people are in crisis in our downtown area. Who do we need to work with to see
Right. I
that
mean,
they get help.
it automatically nests homelessness within something larger.
Exactly. And as
And
the
is that a
downtown.
national, Roseanne, is that a national designation, bids? Is that,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
And they're public space management organizations. There's a group called the International Downtown Association because they're kind of different flavors of bids, but it's basically this governance structure. It's like a backbone. It's kind of what we're talking about. How do you create a structure for collective activity to happen? And so it's, yeah, very telling and an interesting, case study that it was the Downtown Seattle Association that reached out to us, along with one of the strongest and most compelling not-for-profits in the city that has worked for years on resolving homelessness and with individuals with involvement in the criminal justice system and with acute mental health needs. Group called Purpose Dignity Action. And then arrange because the Downtown Seattle Association focuses on a specific geography in the city. They did the convening of many of the not-for-profits who operate in that area to essentially and asked us in some ways to help shape, but also to validate their own instincts, which is we're not going to make progress on homelessness unless we do it together and kind of bring together the different.
Okay. But they actually assemble the stakeholders for you
Oh, yes,
to a
we tell
large
them, like,
degree.
here are the kinds of folks who you're going to need at the table, but they're like, we have those relationships, and they're like, let's get everybody in the same room. And so it's been a case study in how a city can take on this issue, not through primarily the not-for-profits or the COC, but through an entity that already has the right kind of convening power and experience. And so,
And
uh,
presumably they're going to have a symbiotic relationship with the city administration,
mhm,
but
yeah,
they are not the city administration. So
no,
they stand outside it. They
mhm,
become a key node, and then of course they
mhm,
need cooperation and so on and
mhm.
so on. But it doesn't emanate from the government
Doesn't emanate from,
in this
but
case.
as you point out, like they are very linked to the government. One of the things when you establish a business improvement district, it those who are part of the decision, it's a public vote by, and those eligible to vote are, the businesses or property owners within that, geography. What you're voting for is also to tax yourself some incremental amount to create enhanced services for that district. And you work with city government,
So it even
which
extends down to
actually
the
collects
property.
the tax and redistributes it back to you. Yeah.
Okay, so it extends down to the property owners basically. So
Yeah.
it's democratic to that degree. It's not
Mhm.
actually
Yeah.
the businesses imposing this.
Mm-mm.
It really has to be approved
By the property
by the
owners.
citizens basically
Yeah.
of that
Exactly.
district.
Exactly. And
Wow.
the boards of most bids, are very, very clear about broad representation among the different types of property owners and again, the ex officio role of city government. So something to take a look at as, a structure that really echoes, the design of, you know, any kind of shared mechanism for achieving a collective purpose.
Whoa, boy, I'm so happy.
Mhm.
So that is such a way to end this wonderful talk, Roseanne. So wow, we've covered a lot of ground. I think we're up onto about an hour and a half, but it's what a great hour and a half to share with others. So, woo, is there anything you'd like to add? Any message you want to channel to my daughter from through
Oh,
this through
well,
this podcast?
oh gosh, we think that the future of this particular project is a very promising one for Seattle. Yeah, that initially the focus is on resolving unsheltered homelessness in the Pioneer Square neighborhood, but then through that learning, how do you expand that way of working, this deep collaboration and
Well, it's
housing
at
focus.
this
Mhm,
point, I think if you imagine now that this is being piloted in one
mhm,
region of the city, there's many other regions, and right
mhm,
away we have now another variation in selection
Mhm.
opportunity, basically, that we can learn from each other and so on and so forth. In
Mhm.
this case, subunits within a city.
Yep.
And then we can learn from different cities, including Denver, as you just
Mhm.
mentioned,
Yep.
Mississippi, so on, so forth. So the comparisons can take place at multiple scales. That's like extending the coordination network beyond the particular community, basically. All of which is perfectly possible as long as you really, I think the limiting factor there is in many ways the conceptual orientation. How are you thinking about it? And also, I think the degree of hope and sense of possibility that even though this is a wicked problem,
Mhm.
it's one that can be solved, and there's legitimate optimism. It's not just an article of faith. We have examples. It has been done,
It has been
and
done.
so what could be more optimistic than that?
Yeah. Well, it has been a delight to catch up with you. You've been such an inspiration to our work, and it's really quite wonderful that it's converging again right now,
Yeah,
as you have, for all sorts of understandable reasons, a heightened interest in the ecosystem of cities.
yeah, yeah. All good. Okay, so thank you so much again, and I certainly look forward to keeping in regular touch with you.
Likewise, thanks, David.